Mr. Siriani.
Hello, Mr. Moyes. How you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad.
Today's a very exciting day because we're performing live from a professional studio, which is also Mr. Tom Moyes' office.
Used for great purposes.
For all great purposes, including drinking beer in.
Yeah, well, it's not beer.
It's
in case someone from work sees that, it's energy drink, Brooklyn Lager.
Let me rephrase it. It's non-alcoholic, of course, and it's just there to give some wings to Mr. Moyes. But it's definitely a tremendous honour for me to see Tom's magnificent office and see how far he has risen
from the dead.
From the dead, yeah, like literally if you'd seen Tom on some point, some of his nights out, you've said this man has come back from the dead.
Would you say it's the same for you?
Yeah. I'm not one to talk. It's more for me, yeah, particularly the morning after when I'm crawling around, facing the toilet, literally feeling like I want to be dead. And in fact, we might be seeing quite a lot of that tonight and the day after, because we've got a nice reunion with our mates.
Yeah. How many of us are they?
7 of us, the magnificent 7.
No, we could wear the 7 t-shirt then.
Yeah. We could wear the 7 t-shirt. That goes back to our little holiday in Israel.
Psy or die.
Psy or die. Who came up with that phrase?
Other Neil Dog, I think.
Yeah.
I think it comes originally from a sample from a music, anyways.
Yeah.
So we're certainly not the first to say that. What was your most memorable moment from a holiday in Israel?
My most memorable moment from a holiday in Israel. Well, there's definitely a low point, which I remember was the England-Croatia game, that semi-final, where England had the opportunity, of course, to reach a World Cup final. Before it all went a little bit pear-shaped. Obviously, it was still a very good World Cup, but that was a really sort of painful moment where it started off with so much hope, and then things went and crashed down. Some of the nights out were good. That party in the desert, I think that was quite. That was interesting. That was quite special. Jerusalem's incredible. We didn't spend long enough there, if I'm completely honest.
We had to go back to the party.
Of course, yeah. You know, a little bit of culture, Mitros party. But yeah, we should spend longer in Jerusalem. But yeah, would you agree? Party in the desert, Jerusalem.
Yeah, and that night out, there was another psytrance night in that big club. That was quite cool.
Oh, that night. Oh, is it the night I'm thinking about?
Yeah. I don't know.
Can you please explain your feet, Tom? I wasn't going to be like, what is going on about, but your feet.
I took off my flip-flops, basically, and was just like splattering around in this club, like barefoot, which only caused my feet to become completely black.
Yeah.
They pretty much remained black for the rest of the holiday. It was impossible to get off completely.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it was a beautiful sight. Half looked dead.
Yeah. I do not know what was on that floor, but whatever was over your feet wasn't good. But I remember waking up, because we were sort of sharing a room, as myself, Tom, a couple of other lucky fellows who got to go and share with us. I remember waking up on the top by like looking over, because Tom was an absolute bit of a nightmare, shall we say, that evening, and Tommy was snoring very loudly for a couple of hours, like really loudly. Like I never knew a little man could create so much noise. Look over to go and tell you off and swear at you, and then I just saw Tom's blackened feet, and that was it. I was in pieces for like the rest of that morning. Yeah. Can you remember much of that night?
Yeah. Not all of it, but most parts, I think.
Yeah. I remember Felix, I think, helped you home.
Yeah. Because I was being a bit rowdy.
Yeah, rowdy. That's the phrase for it. A little bit rowdy.
Yeah. Thank God for Felix.
Yeah.
The flying bird, who will not be joining us in Cambodia this year.
No, got to. Oh yes, we're going to Cambodia.
Couple of weeks.
Okay, couple of weeks.
3 weeks.
3 weeks. 3 weeks. Yeah, 3 weeks. Jeez. But yeah, unfortunately, Felix can't be joining us. He's a man who I think, how can I describe Felix? He moves slowly. and is a great thinker.
He made it from Syria, so
He made it from Syria.
Took him a few years.
Yeah. He's I mean, if you looked at Felix, you know, you probably think, my God, this man's had a tough long journey. No wonder he wants to rest so much now.
Exactly. By this, it's just that he sits down a lot.
Yeah.
It's exhaustion is a common common feeling that you can see on his face.
Yeah. Just to clarify, before we offend anyone from Syria, we're not saying that Syrians like to rest down and are lazy, but this friend Felix, he's half Armenian, half German, but he looks, you know, like he should be from somewhere like Syria, Yemen. I guess it's just a mix of the German and Armenia, but he's not very German-as, and he's much more French Tom with that sort of willingness to move.
He identifies as a German.
He identifies as a German, but I can't imagine him in the German Panzer Corps stomping along. Yeah.
Anyways, today we wanted to take a bit of a left turn on the podcast and do something a bit more focused on more philosophical and not so much political or historical topics. So my suggestion, we haven't really prepared as per usual, but my suggestion was to talk about responsibility and accountability. But is there any subject that you would like to talk about in particular?
I should make our viewers aware. I want to do one on Foucault. Am I pronouncing that right? The philosopher. Foucault. You say tomato, I say tomato. But yeah, Foucault. I want to do one on Foucault. But I don't know if Tom could be bothered to listen to the whole episode.
No, I didn't listen to the whole thing. I just ran out of time. But
yeah, but no, I think it was a bit too serious.
Yeah, I mean, serious. I'm not able to quote any philosophers like on the back of my hand.
Yeah,
I haven't read enough philosophy. I think I used to be able to, because we had to study it in France. So like our last year, we had philosophy was like for the baccalaureate as well. And that was one of the classes where I was not allowed to answer the questions because I was just being a smart ass. So I raised my hand and like, someone else. Like desperately, and then I'd just say something anyways. Like, but I was quite good because I would be able to cite like philosophers and relate some stupid thing like, Socrates said this, and therefore we could probably say that all these people like big tits with women. So, not exactly that, but like it was obviously quite stupid in the end.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, it was just a smart ass answer.
You must have had a field day with Freud.
Yes, I'm guessing it was one of my favourites.
so kind of just like, we are going to get very sidetracked, I should warn now. Committed audience, but you said it was one of the subjects. What were the other subjects that you were notorious for ruining?
History and geography. Well, all of them really. I tried to remain fairly serious in like physics and chemistry usually, but maths was it was kind of half because I did okay in that.
Yeah.
Or in normal classes we used to like throw like these little rockets.
I know. Is this where you get like a splat bomb and you put a bit of like sort of plastic, so it's a bit of wet tissue, and you put like plastic at the bottom and you go and like boom, throw it up, and it's impossible to remove from the ceiling?
Nearly, yeah. We used like ink cartridges.
Yeah, yes, it's the ink cartridge for the rocket.
A bit of glue and like a piece of paper.
Too,
like
yeah.
we used to like get really artistic in our decorations. And I did one with the kind of attached with like a big, like I did this all with paper and attached to a big penis and like threw it in like some place which stayed for months and like But each time we used to say, "Oh, it's that small kid in our class," because we used to like,
Yeah.
when the teacher would turn around, we'd like run towards where Raphael was, and like, throw it just underneath it, and then teacher would turn around, "Oh, Raphael!" And I'm like, "Oh, for fuck's sake, we're trying to concentrate here."
Yeah, like that was a weird thing with like boys growing up. I remember growing there's like a craze about drawing like sort of like penises. Like I remember, like, I don't know, I must have been born in class, but I was drew like a massive one, because my mate always sent this on his like desk. It was like this huge, like, sort of like penis, and the teacher came around and he was like, "Max, what is this?" it was a very good one. It was kind of like quite like fat, huge, like balls, really hairy. But yeah.
I think I stuck one behind on the back of one of my teachers once too. I can't remember which one. I think French teacher.
Yeah.
He wore it for a bit.
Yeah. I remember bringing like, what's his name, Mr. Spears. Yeah, he used to get tormented. So like, I don't know. Like, I was generally probably quite a good kid, but I'd have moments where I'd go like more like mental. So I just had this like one lesson where I just brought in a whoopee cushion, and then just like every single time we'd speak, it just like sort of like sit up and down, and it would like go off, and we'd like move around the class, so he was never sure who was doing it. It was also like the humming game, you know, when the entire class hums and the teacher like spots, and you can't do anything about it.
We used to also like record. We recorded the bell from when the classroom ends.
Yeah.
We used to put it on early, so sometimes we finished like 15 minutes early. Like, we record it, put it on, and like, oh, okay, and like. So once a few times maybe, we tried it really early, like 15 minutes in, and like, it's like, what? And teacher looked really confused, like, I just brushed it off, so it had to be timed fairly correctly.
Yeah.
It was just like many things, like...
There were probably a few teachers who were just like, I can get an early break here.
Yeah, happy about it.
Yeah, because I remember like I was a teacher, not really very good one, but I was a little teacher for a little bit. So yeah, a nice opportunity to get an extra 10 minutes of break. Blame it on the kids, everyone wins.
It's a win-win situation.
Yeah.
What would you say was the worst thing that happened to you as a teacher, or the most annoying thing that happened?
I remember like quite early on. Like I was teaching an English class, and they especially they come at new teachers. So you might be lucky, and you might work in a good school with decent enough behaviour, very supportive staff. But if you're in a school where you've got let's say fairly tough or naughty kids, and they just let you crack on with it straight on, and as a new teacher, particularly a new one coming in, the kids will like go at you. And until you've, taught for a long enough period of time, you're just going to have to go and deal with that bad behaviour. Nothing personal. It's just the fact that they don't know you. It's the way things are.
But what was
I'm coming to that. Yeah, the reason why I say that it's important to like understand that in that first month, basically, the kids will just do anything they want, really. Like. And if you've got 30 of them...
Shouldn't you be strict from the very beginning?
You can be, but in all honesty, like, for example, I was probably a bit too nice in the first couple of weeks. And then even once you start being stricter, it's very hard to depends. So we had a chance, warning, action, behavioural system. The trouble with that is you always have to go and write kids' names on the board. If you turn around to go and, write a kid's name, one kid's going to do something there, another one there, another one there. So it's incredibly hard to go and track it all. So you just dash around trying to put out fires and send out, all the naughty kids. However, while dashing around and sending out kids, it was a boiling hot day in September, fans going, third week, I was quite, sleep deprived, I was quite knackered, I was pretty pissed off if I'm lying, so I wasn't really looking where my feet was going, and I had a fan going on the floor, like this fan didn't work properly, so the top bit had fallen off, so it was just the blades of the fan, and I was like going around, I was like, Ben, Harry, like do this, literally ran around, I was going around, my like trousers caught in the wheels of the fan, and like my foot was like literally like stuck there in front of the class, and they were just like pulling my trouser in. And then when I came out with just like a horrible frayed trouser leg, I was like, oh, for God's sake. And obviously the whole kids were like giggling. There was another time where I taught incredibly like hungover. That was a really challenging day. just like seeing the kids come in too like lively. And we were doing war poetry, so that was Band of Brothers, lesson after lesson. Not that I'm saying, I mean, it was kind of linked to that learning, but I'm not going to lie. It was
again a win-win situation, probably.
Win-win situation, yeah. They wanted to watch something, I wanted to watch something, or rather, I didn't really want to think or talk about or talk to them. So on went the DVD. This is probably why my time teaching was somewhat short-lived. But no. Yeah, you learn a lot in teaching about dynamics and the community in which you work in. Even if it goes wrong, it's kind of worth doing, maybe, because you get an insight, or doing something like that at some point gives you a bit of an insight. For anyone maybe who wants to go into something like politics, it's not a bad thing to do. And so when the government launches the latest political reforms or educational reforms, you know which ones are good, which ones are shit. But yeah,
most of them are like, I think the UK is like late, always to put the reforms on the education. Like at some point they they were lacking all the scientific subjects. Now they made a reform on that, but they're gonna lack all the language subjects. Like it's just always too late.
Yeah,
always too late. But
there was talk of them scrapping GCSEs. Because I must admit, sort of like when I was 19, 20, I always thought GCSEs were a good thing. I mean, having taught, in my opinion, quite a negative thing. Because the trouble is that you have this huge exam when they're 16, and that means the years of 14 to 16 in that teaching time are just essentially spent trying to spoon feed them knowledge, which they're going to need to get a good grade at the GCSEs. And if they don't get that good grade, they're kind of screwed in terms of their future chances. So half of them will get decent enough GCSEs, they'll be fine going to college and universities, but for the other half it becomes incredibly difficult. And then it means in that teaching period of 14 to 16, you can't always teach them properly. So if you look at someone like Holland, where essentially of course in this country we've got A-levels, but in Holland, for example, they don't do GCSEs. They spend that time 15 to 18 trying to move them onto more of a university way of thinking and learning. Because it's quite interesting, now I work at University of Reading, quite a lot of the academics do say to me, I know it's the same at all universities, that particularly the British students, they can't always think or they can't engage in too much of an independent manner. And it's not always all of the students' fault, it's just the fact that, for a long period of time, they've been taught in quite, if you want, a spoon-fed manner and in an environment where it's very hard for them to think and learn in a manner that will actually better suit the university and the work life thereafter. But that's my opinion.
It prepares for exams, pressure, and holding on a schedule, I guess, and offers to learn all this. Because if you prepare for an exam, the advantage is that everyone nationwide learns the same thing, and you know where you stand, and like nationwide, because otherwise you get some areas which will like not bother teaching stuff because like, they're too occupied with like trying to get kids to just sit down. So like you get the German way is like they get dispersed into 3 different types of school, like one more focused on manual type of work, so if they want to become
one in the middle and then one more at the top.
Exactly. And they do that at like 12, 11, so
the
like
Dutch
very,
do the same.
very early. So the argument against that would be like, that's too early, you can't deliver your full potential at that time. But then again, it does enable to get all the kids who have the common sense of drive. So obviously I've always known that kids who didn't do so well into the academic area, they're quite happy to take on some more on-hand tasks, and it might not be that bad in the end. I mean, even I think the German education is quite good in that sense. I feel like when they come 18, everyone comes with a pretty good educational background. If it's not with in terms of academia, it's in terms of more manual work and like on-hand knowledge. But they've also got a very good system of that apprenticeships.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting.
We're starting
France
to
kind of gets in between. Yeah, that's why the UK implemented it, but like years later.
Well, and also, I think my problem with GCSEs is, again, they go and touch upon, because in France you don't have GCSEs, right?
We have brevet, it's equivalent.
So is that the equivalent? I'm not necessarily saying, you know, scrap GCSEs and don't replace them with anything. I just think they embolise everything in many ways that's wrong with the system, which is that every single kid at the age of 16 will go and sit these suite of exams, at which some who are more academically minded will work better at. But if as a kid, like let's say you're better at something like sport, or you're better at quite practical subjects, you're immediately at a disadvantage, because all the onus is essentially put on maths, sciences and English. And if you do not do well at those, even if let's say you're a very talented chef, your ability to go on and become a chef one day is still actually quite limited, because a lot of the basic colleges, for example, are going to want to see 5s and above in those subjects. I guess what I'm against is something which is developed in this country, whereby all pupils essentially go through exactly the same system, and there is not any attempt to go and separate then or differentiate it around. I prefer the German and Dutch model, however fortunate it might be, where they split them into 3 streams. And certainly when you go and teach, it's very challenging to go and teach a classroom of kids, like let's say in English, where they've got there's a wide variation in ability. I also taught with history, and again the variation there was huge. It's simply not always possible to go and allocate your teaching ability possible. So streaming, either having a system where schools can stream effectively, or having more streaming across. The trouble with all these things is the educational system. Some people will be against what I said is fine, but I think everyone can agree that it probably does need a bit of an overhaul in the UK, but there's no government really brave enough to go and do that, because the change would be so huge. But I think that's just typical in terms of education. Each government that comes in is quite a short-term thinking. They don't really think ahead too much in terms of the long-term. That's a big problem.
I think having it all the same for everyone does go in takes the moral high ground versus the German or Dutch way in terms of letting a bit more equality of.
But why can't you just have a fluid structure where they can move in between the 3?
That's the thing. In Germany or in Holland, they don't. You can move in between, but it doesn't really actually happen. So once you're stuck in a route, you usually can have to continue. You can redo it, but usually people who want to go back into a more academic route, who've been in the Realschule, Hochschule, or the Fachschule, sorry, have to go through with it, and then after they've finished their schooling, they'll do a equivalent to A-level exam. Okay, yeah. So that.
I mean, you can have the moral high ground, but do you actually achieve more results? Because I would argue in terms of social mobility, somewhere like Germany. So a good example was Theresa May before she got too consumed by things. One of her ideas was having, like, let's say, people from a factory floor have the ability to one day be on a boardroom. Similar enough, I think, in a sense to what they have in Germany. But that's part of the problem we've got in this country, which is, like, let's say if you end up working in a factory, or sometimes if you become a builder, that can be negatively looked on when you go and teach in school. But actually, those are very good professions. So, you know, somebody who works as a brickie, for example, can earn excellent money. And if that's where somebody's strengths are suited, at the age of 14 to 15, we should respect those professions more when they emerge from that. And we should, give people who, let's say, start out on the factory floor more opportunities to one day rise to a boardroom, and more opportunities to maybe one day enter politics. Part of the problem is, paradoxically, by trying to give everyone the same moral opportunity, is we've actually kind of just created a system where you have less, essentially, social mobility and ability to go and progress, because you're only going to get there if you've got the academic, let's say, talents, but you go and shut the door for people who might not, let's say, necessarily always be good at school subjects when they go and grow up for whatever reason as they develop. So actual streaming and having it fluid in between, I would argue, might actually create more social mobility and, above all, equality of opportunity.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
At least within schools. So, like, I guess you've got 2 options. You can have streaming where you have separate schools, but you could also have, like, let's say, within schools, you could have the same school structure, but then you could have, like, let's say, a lower stream, middle stream, and upper stream, and flexibility in between.
So making it very, very sort of categorized for the like type of class you're gonna get.
Yeah, exactly. It was actually one of my colleagues, an old housemates, Mike, came up with this, and he was explaining to me. It actually seemed like a pretty good idea. I think a few people have suggested it. Yeah, so it's just simply by trying to create enough options that you've got enough options and opportunities in there to go and suit all the kind of range of talents that will come to you when you're actually teaching. Whereas now it's very difficult because unless you're quite academically able in terms of certain subjects, it's going to be a struggle for you to really progress and let's say achieve certain positions once you get at 18, and then later on, of course, into working life as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, because at the moment it's still like the most difficult part is to get into anything. So if you get into university, then things go by themselves after. Even if you get to two, like usually people won't get third, but you know.
Yeah.
It goes by itself, and the hard part is just getting in. Same thing with work, really. Once you're in, they're stuck with you.
yeah, that's true. It's all about access, and I guess you could say it's all about the government, if you're speaking about it, taking responsibility, if you want, for the long term, if you want opportunities and welfare of their people, which maybe they're struggling to do now, which leads us on to discussion. Tom, this is your idea. Do you want to give me an idea in terms of what you mean by this responsibility and accountability?
Yeah, I think we have to re-deviate back to
it,
back to something more philosophical rather than political.
I tried.
All right, so the idea, well, for me there's a dilemma in that in some ways you are responsible for everything that you do, and in some ways things that happen to you that do not are not caused or not influenced by you still fall under your responsibility. Say if someone needs first aid help, falls on the ground, it becomes, as soon as that happens, although it's not a causal thing that happens from anything you've done, you still have to become responsible at that moment. Versus actually the thought that anything that happens to you, you are not responsible for anything at all. So that would mean that in theory, you're not responsible for, like murderers aren't responsible, because they've actually been born with this psychological defect.
Right.
And it's caused by genetics, which comes from their parents and goes too far back to put any responsibility. You'd have to actually put into judiciary process dead people to make it really worthwhile. They could have some trauma from their childhood. Are they responsible for that? No, you would say no, because they're a child. But the effect is that they've murdered someone, or I mean, it could be something else, but steal a car, it could be something much more simple. So and then you've got all the hormonal issues, things you don't really control yourself. Your brain.
Well, you don't.
I'm out of control.
Yeah.
No, but your brain makes its own decision, and the chemical reactions in your brain are not something that comes from your willpower. They just happen naturally. So where does the responsibility come? Well, where does the responsibility end? And usually, we could say when you become an adult, because you're supposed to learn enough to be responsible. But even kids have some responsibility. And
where do you draw the line? I guess you could argue. So if you look at it, lots of studies now argue that people grow up a bit more slowly now. So in the past, you see all these boy kings, 15 or 16, but maybe due to their environment, they had to grow up incredibly quickly. Whereas now in today's world, it certainly seems, looking at many 18, 19-year-olds, that they're still quite young in many ways. So I guess that could again fit in terms of when do they become fully responsible for their actions.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, we've got people who would say you're 100% responsible for your actions. You've always got a choice. Do you make the right choice or don't you? And therefore society can go and pass judgment. And on the other side, you'd have some people who'd say we're products of the environment into which we were born.
Exactly.
And we're products of our parents and genetics, and we're trapped. And we might think we're making certain choices, but actually, in a sense, our path is somewhat predetermined.
Which I think, in a lot of ways, it is. But I think what life is completely predetermined, because what you do is very much based on the genetics, on what happens in your childhood, and what happens in your environment is very much about where you grow up. So for example, a Somalian kid that comes here and starts stabbing people will do so because he's been through a lot back in his country. He's immigrated here, not born here, because he hasn't been given the chance to get a proper education or good moral values. So in that case, he's not responsible, but you cannot live in a world without responsibility. It would be complete chaos. So you have to have the accountability.
Surely, in truth, the truth lies somewhere in between there, because you often see people from unbelievably tough backgrounds who then, if you want, end up being quite successful, or if you want, they end up becoming what society would view as a good citizen. So how does that work? Well, maybe it just meant that despite everything that was thrown at them, they still ended up being quite morally tough, and they made the correct choices. Even though if you look at their family background and environment in which they were growing up in, that shouldn't be possible to happen, but it does. So I think you can say I think you can say that to a certain extent, we should have a sympathy with quite a lot of particularly when they're quite young. So if you've got an 11 or 12-year-old kid, and as a teacher, they are misbehaving and they're being really difficult and they're getting into loads of trouble outside school. And in the past, the action may have been, to go and put that kid in isolation and constantly go and discipline. That might actually be the right approach, because that kid could be acting up because they could be going back to a household where the parents are fighting, where they can be getting shouted at, where they might be neglected, and they also might be growing up in an environment where it's quite a tough town, etc. And then of course they're going to, let's say, end up in crime, because because at that point in their life, crime seems like it's the only way out. So particularly, I think if you look at someone like Mike Tyson is quite an interesting childhood when he was growing up, but in the same way, a 15, 16-year-old Mike Tyson, you can't really blame him in some ways for getting into all this trouble. But once Mike Tyson gets into his 20s and 30s, though, and he's given an opportunity and he sees all these opportunities, similar to lots of young people, when they get into their 20s and 30s, at that point, do they not become responsible for an action? Because they have an opportunity to make other choices, and they've got a brain, and they can go and think through all the various options, and they've lived long enough and experienced enough.
The brain is still wired from all the causal actions that happened before. I mean, the way you think that right now is only caused by an action further, and everything is caused by something that happened in the past. So you're ultimately just a product of the past that starts with, your mum and dad fucking each other.
What a charming input into this philosophical discussion.
But then it just happens and your brain gets wired, and then it's just what you do will be ultimately, if you're a dickhead because you've done this and this in your past, and then if you try and find the reasons why you've done the things in the past that cause you to be a dickhead, they've been caused by something that happened in the past. So you get in this endless loop of actually, where does it end?
Okay, this is quite broad. So to narrow it down somewhat, let's go and focus it upon. Let's say criminals, so people who go and commit quite heinous crimes, and to what extent are they responsible? And then more often than not, you're right, that that they come from quite difficult environments. They often come from extremely difficult and broken families.
But I watched this documentary about a guy who was studying sociopathic behavior, and I found that they had something in the prefrontal cortex that it was typical in sort of highly sociopathic people.
But that's a small percentage of actual criminals, so they're actual genuine psychopaths.
No, well, yeah, well, it was more about like murderers, and murderers maybe like 80% are have this sociopathic like brain structure. And he did this test among his. He did the test also among his family.
Okay.
To like view if someone had this sort of let's say genetic defect, and found out that he had it himself.
Oh right,
and he was basically explaining.
What's the name of the study? And there's only one study, because issues with studies that one study can show this, but another study can go and contradict it or rival it, etc.
No, it's pretty well proven that sociopathic behaviour is caused by like some brain.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. You're right. Yeah, you're right in that.
This guy was just explaining like, if I wouldn't have grown up in the right environment, I would have probably been a murderer or rapist or whatnot.
Yeah. Well,
so the environment does play a role as well.
The biggest part may be the environment and the parents, depending upon the situation. There are. Often you do get some rare examples, but not some rare examples, but you do get actually quite a few examples where, you just have a kid, they're born in what's seemingly quite a nice family, but for whatever reason it feels like something like wrong. And I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but there are definitely a few out there where they ends up committing quite horrible crimes, and it doesn't quite make sense as to why that happened. So I guess that big example of genetics.
It'll be like genetics.
Yeah, genetics working back, but more often than not, I think it does come down to environment. So the best example is if you look at, like, say, sexual abusers, you've got a whole history, and it has much more often than not that you'll see, let's say, an abuse like Michael Jackson. It's obviously come out, but if you look at the level of abuse that was inflicted on him as a kid, it's not altogether surprising. And likewise, if you actually look back at quite a lot of some of the, particularly with like the child abuse cases, quite often those who go and abuse children are also abused themselves as children.
Exactly.
And so it's an example of just what an impact the environment can have. But by the same flip side, there are lots of people who suffer child abuse who then do not go on to become abusers. So how does that work? Is it therefore both genetic and the environment? Because are those who abuse themselves and then go on to become abusers? Is that their genetics coming into play and having a perfect storm with the environment?
Well, I do think the environment plays a big part. If so, it's a lot about role models, and until you're 13 or 12, it's your parents, and then it becomes your friends. Yeah. And they have the biggest impact on your moral values, and how you perceive your role models is extremely important of how you then get your values in life. So I guess it depends a lot on what crowd you get into. Yeah. However, this is also due a lot to chance and where you live, what happens. If you've got a lot to do with older kids, younger kids in your neighbourhood, for example, then it will ultimately have a different impact. If you're often with the older kids, you'll get into stuff earlier, alcohol or like partying, and that might put you off after. But again, it might just put that right click in your button in your brain that's just going to make you go a bit crazier.
Well, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Quite often with mental illnesses. So, for example, people link cannabis to mental illnesses. And somebody pointed out, I think maybe on the Joe Rogan show, often cannabis can act as a trigger for people with mental illnesses. And like, I've seen it happen, and I know some people who can smoke weed every day and they're completely and utterly fine. As weird as it might seem, they might be a little bit lazy here and there every evenings, but they'll go into the office the next day and they'll be completely fine. And those people will often say, weed's completely fine. But there are other people who I've seen who've smoked it too regularly or even smoked it a little bit, and they end up having a mental episode because of it. And so therefore you'd have thought, well, genetically, I mean, it's only a minority of people, it's still quite a substantial amount of people. Clearly they must have some underlying issue, which the weed or something else which happens in their life acts as the trigger too.
Yeah, exactly. I think, for example, some, say for like sexual abuse, it's the same thing. You'd have some like trauma in your childhood for some XYZ, and when you turn like, let's say 25, 20, 26, you see that happen to someone else or something like that, and then that's it automatically normalizes it in your brain because the right buttons have been pushed down.
Yeah.
And then you become a sexual abuser yourself. So how would you determine if they're actually responsible for that?
Well, I guess there's two angles to that. I think first of all we could probably agree or maybe conclude that a frightening amount of what the kind of person we end up being is down to the environment in which we grow up in, which obviously very complex, but probably more than maybe we would like to concede as a society. But in terms of do you have responsibility or what kind of responsibility we should attribute to individuals, I guess that boils down to what kind of level of freedom of choice do we think we have? Do we think despite the fact that we're programmed environment, we can emerge to a place where we're 22, 23, and even if our instinct is to do something wrong, we nonetheless have the ability to say, no, I will not do that because I know that action is wrong. Or do we think you're kind of trapped by your experiences, or at least some people are trapped by their experiences, and they just, however much they fight it, they can't end up, like let's say committing, I don't know, a murder or a crime and abuse just because that's what, if you want, has made the environment to do. And the second in society, how do we respond to that? Because even if, like let's say we had a situation where you do get some people who can't take another course of action, where you just can't really go and let them off free as a society, because how would society function? As a society, we surely need some kind of rules, and we need some accountability to go and govern us. Otherwise, it's just the law of the jungle. Do you agree? Disagree?
I kind of agree.
I'm not saying I fully agree with what I just said, but I'm interested in what you think.
I disagree with the fact that with the fact that you said the environment is playing the bigger role. I think it's more genetics, and the environment will be the things pushing the buttons on that genetic code that you have. So it will depend mostly on your genetics, and the environment will say, as you were taking the example of a good family, if the genes aren't good, sometimes you'll have a bad apple in the bunch of kids that you have that will be a sociopath or something. Because he has this genetic modification, but ultimately he's pushed to the same environment as the other kids who turn out fine. So it's very much the environment having an impact on the buttons that in your brain, which are basically the genes. So I think in the core it's the genetic code that you have, and then the environment plays a role in terms of if the right or wrong buttons are pushed. And in that sense also I do fully agree that you as a society you can't let things happen without any sort of punishment or incentivization to not do it again, which could be prison, it could be or death penalty in the USA. But if you want to act, because a lot of the genes are called by mother and father, if you want to kind of stop the bleed in the society as a whole, you have to do that. You have to put someone into prison, make sure that the next environment along the line genetically will not push the same buttons, and I see very much in the future the CRISPR and genetic modifications maybe playing a role in there, maybe at the features level or later on in life.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to think about ethically. I think I think in terms of the trouble with the genetic versus environment argument is that people try and simplify it. So the truth is that your genes might go and create, X kind of personality type, but then the kinds of life or the kinds of things that might happen to that person when they're born, well, there's such a multitude of different pathways there that essentially it's your environment that might help to determine what kind of path or what kind of decisions you end up making. So, for example, you might be quite an aggressive person when you're going born, but your environment could determine, how you end up channeling that aggression, if you end up channeling it at all. If you're born into or if you have quite, let's say, a violent father, and your father encourages you to use your fists a lot at school, well, that aggressive person might end up being, a little bit of a fight. If, however, they end up being born in, let's say, quite a proper family, then maybe that aggressive person ends up being a big banker, etc. Like, who knows? I think
still a wanker.
Banker's still a wanker. Yeah. The point being that the environment is somewhat a catalyst for the kind of pathway which you end up going down. But it's an interesting one in terms of society, how we should respond to it. Because this is what Mr. I'm going to get this wrong again. Is it? Please, Foucault. Foucault. Yeah. Foucault ends up saying, how you've essentially got, let's say, as a society, you've got a period where you're always being constantly observed, and we've got an idea of let's say, the model society and the model citizen we want within that. So therefore, when somebody is within society, they at least have an idea of what they think society should want them to look like, and it's up to them whether or not they end up meeting those norms, or they also know exactly what society does not want them to do, and so therefore it's up to them whether or not they end up becoming that person or doing actions that would make them look like that kind of person.
I think that's a good point. Like, if some people will get enough exposure to the different environments and different circles of society, then they will be better able to channel themselves into having better moral values. I think that would be. I'm not sure how it would be possible to actually do it. You have to kind of invite all the ghetto kids to the posh birthday parties in the resident societies, and do the opposite way around. Something like that, or just like kids playing football have to go to a library for a birthday party again. But you have to kind of, I think, the bigger the mix, the more chance of having the right buttons pushed, I think.
Well, that's why parents are incredibly important. If you look at someone like Anthony Joshua, the boxer, of course, it seems like when he speaks, not always that easy of him growing up, but he's quite lucky, I think, to have had incredibly, if you want, loving and supportive mother, who would always stand by him and end up trying to push him in the right direction. Well, actually, Mike Tyson's a really interesting example. Have you seen the documentary about him? I've always wanted to watch it.
I've heard him speak about his childhood. I think he resents his mum a bit.
Because he fed him alcohol, and kind of, when he was just 8, 9, just a kid growing up. I think he's a good example of someone who's who's clearly has had a bit of aggression in him. He was brought up in an unbelievably difficult environment, no father, quite an abusive mother, but as they went through in life, particularly, as he went through in his boxing career, he had the opportunity, if you want to go and discover an alternative ways of doing things, and I'm not just talking about the mushrooms, but a different way of being socially responsible. And through learning about all of this, let's say, he ended up taking a more calm, more peaceful life.
And that could be. That could a lot be due with him like channeling his anger into boxing, and also getting the right role models into boxing, because he was spending most of his time boxing. So who was his coach? Was it a good guy? Maybe in that case.
Yeah, he speaks highly about his coach. Who saved him.
The point you make about psychedelic drugs, I think, is also something that definitely needs to be explored more. So I think we were talking to Ricky from security at University. He was talking about hooliganism back in the 80s, and how it used to be much more violent. And then he said, in the 90s it calmed down a lot. I said, why? And he said, well, we had MDMA. And suddenly the happy drugs, so making it a bit less, having an impact into how people were feeling at football games. A bit more on the happy side. I mean, it can't all be. You can never have it all chemically modified, and everything can't be modified with CRISPR. And it's still. I'm sure there's some things we could do better in order to treat people with mental issues much better than we do today. If you look at paedophiles, they go to prison, and then as soon as they go out, it reoccurs again, the problems they have. Maybe in the psychedelic drugs, there would be something that would. I mean, it's all about opening the mind to other things, and same thing with crime, same thing with being stuck in a life situation where you just need a bit more open-mindedness to broaden the horizon of opportunities that actually lies in front of you, but you might not realise at that time.
Well, I mean, I don't know if hooliganism was solved by psychedelic drugs, although the MDMA one's an interesting one in terms of how that has transformed the clubbing scene, and certainly about how certain drugs. I think that's always an interesting one in terms of drug legalization. Some of the argument why I think certain things should be legalized is because I've seen various effects, and in my opinion, the effect upon that individual, it doesn't make them, let's say, an aggressive individual, at least while they're on it. Whereas something like booze does create quite a lot of aggression. But in terms of, I guess this is a sort of building on or developing upon the point is like, let's say we agree as society, we have to have things such as like prison. What those prisons look like is maybe the most important aspect. So a big problem is when people often, let's say, get out from prison, they don't really have any opportunities. The prison can be a stain upon their record, and also during that time in prison, it's not like they were given the opportunity to learn anything or to take anything on board. The whole rehabilitation process is somewhat, particularly in this country, ends up taking second fiddle, particularly if you look at the amount of numbers within prison. Some of the reports
makes it worse. If the chance of committing a second crime is so much higher.
Or like the level of drug abuse in prisons now is shockingly high, and the lack of control is quite. I'm not saying all prisons are like that. Just from the bits that I've read, a worryingly high proportion are, and you see people who are going into prison and they're hardly going into an environment where they're going to learn anything or be given an opportunity afterwards. So of course they're going to offend again, or they're very likely to go and offend again. It shouldn't really be a surprise. So I think that's a big thing: is what should our prisons look like, and what should the ambition of the prison aim to be? Should it be the Foucault thing where the prisons are essentially used to try and develop a certain model of citizen? Is that the ultimate aim of prison?
Yeah, it should be, and it comes back to what you were saying earlier about choice. If the person will always have the choice of taking the better decision, but often people will take that choice because they feel stuck, and prison, I feel at the moment, doesn't open any choice opportunities. It just closes them and narrows them down. So it would be, in a sense, doing that prison and to society as a whole, being more of an opener rather than a closer, and like fixing paths for people should hopefully help in terms of general health of the society.
I agree. Maybe we should go into this into more detail in the next podcast. Have an opportunity to study some prisons, look at all their various systems.
Yeah, I think we have to bring this to some sort of conclusion.
Because it's time to go away for the weekend and begin our own debaucherous activities for the next couple of days.
Exactly. Yeah. I just hope it goes the same way on your side. And,
have a lovely Easter weekend, or indeed a lovely couple of weeks after it, depending on when we get this out.
Take care.
Take care.